Hello, RoahmMythril here once again, getting back to Memo 3, and, well, we have a lot of judge commentary to get through, so let's get right to it. Starting with 122nd place, The Warped Void by 8 Soma Cruz. This stage got a 45 even, with a 1.4 in difficulty, 14 in design, 9.2 in fun, 6.4 in creativity, 8.4 in aesthetics, and 7 in functionality. Meh. Wow, not the best first impression. Non-threatening enemies in a free token is one thing, but a surprise shield attacker, a cutscene that can hurt you, and screen shake that induced a mild headache? Yeah, this is off to a poor start. I wonder how the cutscene hurt them. Weird. I think I get the idea here. This is supposed to be bizarre and inexplicable. Did it succeed? No. The vast majority of the level is basic enemy scenarios and very little platforming. Any variety is caused by poor design. In particular, the several screen bubble room is tedious, especially if you want the token. There's also not enough warning when double gravity triggers, which has caused at least one cheat hit. Now, this isn't completely bland. The attempt to show wandering heads' flight path is appreciated, assuming that's the intent behind the wall decals in their rooms. There's also a melody response cannon, perhaps the most interesting part of the level, but the second one bungles it when you realize you can leave the room on the ceiling. The rest of the level was not designed for that, to say the least. Oh dear. One thing that could have made this more fun was a proper boss. Unfortunately, Crystal Man just dies, and then you randomly return to normal space. That's an anticlimax in an already boring level, creating an end result that's playable but not fun. Shinryu. Well, that happened, I guess. Honestly, outside of the strange visuals, this stage doesn't really have a whole lot of substance to it. The room layouts are all rather basic, enemies are pretty much a non-issue, except maybe for the Crystal Joes and their usual absurd damage output, and the gimmicks are severely underutilized. Everything is mostly regulated to its own little section, which really hurts when it's easy to see how the stage could have been more refined. Combining reverse gravity, bubbles, and lower/higher jumps was an opportunity that feels completely missed out on here. Similarly, fighting Crystal Man while upside down might have been a decent spin on his boss fight, but unfortunately we'll never know if it was or not, since it was reduced to a gag. Those issues aside, there's one more glaring oversight that can actually cause the player to get stuck. After dealing with the second melody response cannon, it's very easy to enter the next room while upside down. Doing this puts you in a situation where you can't progress, since you need to slide through an opening at the end of the room, which you can't reach while on the ceiling. Oh, yeah, that would be a problem. Besides the above oversight, the overly long bubble writing segment, and the melody response cannons, the visuals are probably the most memorable thing about this stage. While I usually like abstract aesthetics, I can't help but feel they were somewhat wasted here. If you're going to make a level as visually strange as this one, then it wouldn't hurt to capitalize on it and make it a more integral part of the level, instead of just some odd/fancy window dressing. Patchy. Twisty Turnies. Certainly a very bizarre stage. It's kinda charming in a way, though. Some neat ideas, such as the gravity flipper against the Simon Says mini-boss. It's a bit on the short side, though, and the stage doesn't really push its gimmicks more outside of the mini-boss, and the strange non-mazy maze near the end. It's fine as a little sightseeing kind of level just from the odd aesthetics alone. One troubling section would be the one with the bubble riding. It's a bit of a crawl having to wait for the bubbles to raise to reach the right screen again to jump across the tiny bubbles in order to proceed. I was also expecting something to jump scare you in the final room where everything is normal again, like a Monty Python foot coming down after grabbing the element. Not gonna lie, that would have been pretty amazing. That definitely would have gotten me. Flashman85. I'm of the opinion that a crossover level is only as good as its fidelity to the source material. Aesthetics are a nice start, but if you're going to reference Wario Land 2, go all out. That's where those graphics were from. Oh man, I haven't played Wario Land 2 in so long. I forgot that was part of that game. A game for children, yes. Here, have nightmare eyeballs, mouths, and ears just fastened to the background wall meat. I forgot just how weird that place was. Anyway, if you're going to reference Wario Land 2, go all out. Conveyors, more pass-through platforms, things dropping from the mouths in the background, lock all weapons except break dash. Yeah, honestly, that would have worked. The level is weird enough for Wario, but not for the right reasons. It's weird because there's no unified tone to the humor and no underlying logic to the design. I can live with a ho-hum Super Mario World end caps. They provide appropriate contrast to make the weird seem weirder. But everything else is a mess of random challenges with a loose aquatic theme. Instead of teaching and then testing, the level plops obstacles in front of the player and proceeds to waste their time. The whole reason I made Oh Joe's was to inspire people to design differently. Well, I'll give you partial credit for the first high-gravity Joe encounter. I love puzzles, but it's hard to love gravity flips that don't consistently correspond with background graphics. Interminable trial-and-error bubble rides, a memory game with a switch hidden behind the health bar, and secret paths that look identical to bottomless pits. Yep, that one got me. That's why I had to go back into the stage again. Only the bubble token is passable. It doesn't help that the checkpoint that'll likely get the most use is before the tedious, time-consuming segments that should only need to be cleared once. Myriad polish issues bring the level down further. Try riding Rush Jet across the opening section, or leaving the mini-boss chamber with gravity still reversed, or backtracking from the final screen. Notice the couple invisible blocks and the absent tiles beyond the edge of the screen when everything is shaking. The level is playable, sure, but I want more than playable. At least I got an energy element out of it. And a spark. Some stages are weird for the sake of weird, and yet others don't really go far enough to be all that memorable. This is the case here. We have a fairly low-key stage that hinders itself by a severe lack of conveyance. Oftentimes, new gravity switches are indicated in a fairly nondescript manner. I guess this is actually intentional, but it makes for a puzzling first impression when my jump randomly goes from full height to low and I get smacked in the head by a Crystal Joe. The Waveman bubble segment is interesting, but makes a rather baffling first impression, which is fine and all, but the lack of rules makes the associated token all rather irritating. Maybe it is doable conventionally, but trying to repeatedly throw yourself at the darn thing and taking such a long time to reset, ultimately ending with the realization that the solution seems to be, screw it, I'm using Magnet Beam, not a great feeling to invoke. There's also the glitches. Nothing game-breaking, but giving an aura of lack of polish. Gemini Man just appears kinda broken. And there's buggy collision detection, with the same tile being used for different types of collision, or having collision that is invisible. It's hard to know if these are intentional or not, but again, that's not a great feeling to invoke. I did rather like how Melody Response Cannon got used. Many stages use this thing in an absolutely dreadful manner, but the restraint is appreciated. The graphics and atmosphere is a mixed bag for me. The tile set seems intentionally limited, but the occasions of tile cutoff means that, yet again, it falls under the aura of lacking polish. The music is weird for the sake of weird, but it's probably an acquired taste. It took me multiple playthroughs for it to start to grow on me. The stage also manages to completely end on an anticlimax. The Crystal Man gag doesn't quite have the punch of Combust Man from the previous contest, and the stage just really peters out after an ending cutscene. For once, I'm actually rather disappointed by the lack of fake out at the energy element. There are some creative moments here and there, but it just never pushes it above average, and the issues, though small, drag it below that. There always seems to be Mario, or in this case Wario Land, themed levels in these contests. I guess you chose something less generic, so that's a positive at least. Shame the stage seems to be relying on the weirdness to make it work. So yeah, all in all, it is a surreal stage, but I do kind of agree that it's really heavily relying on the graphics to do that work. Like, having a weird sort of maze setup that was more of a true maze, that might have worked better here, but everything is fairly linear, except gravity getting kind of mucked up here and there. And yeah, the fact that you can't really tell what is a bottomless pit and what is a hidden area, I honestly kind of felt like I had to go back into the stage for the wrong reason. Like, it didn't feel so much cleverly hidden, that token that I missed, as it was just, oh, I was supposed to go down what looks like death. Okay. All in all, it's an okay stage, but yeah, I definitely agree there needed to be a bit more polish here and there. So next up, 121st place, Operation Narcissistic Stratosphere by Bizarre Idea Man. This one got a 45.2, with a 1.2 in difficulty, 13.2 in design, 12.4 in fun, 7 in creativity, 3.4 in aesthetics, and 9.2 in functionality. Mick. What? Now that we have the reference to my MagMemel 1 review out of the way, wow, this was a very surprising level. This is essentially Vein Space from MagMemel 1, hence the synonymous, if more verbose, name. Vein Space. Gods, I vaguely do remember that name. But also, MagMammal 1 was a long time ago for me. I think that was actually the last project I did on my previous computer, come to think of it. So, yeah. Memories aren't the most solid, but I do remember the name. And also, now, realizing that, okay, the title makes more sense now, it's synonyms. Very verbose ones, but synonyms. Okay, so this is essentially vein space from MagMammal 1, hence the synonymous if more verbose name, but instead of just a straight drop, it's an actual level with more gameplay than just another spike drop. Okay, I do vaguely remember just a level that was purely a spike drop. Gods, it's been a long time. I can't say I've seen anything like it in these games, that's for sure, and it has the same boring aesthetic issues as the original level, so intended reference or not, I won't be providing many points there. That being said, it also felt pretty clever. While the level itself is super easy, barely an inconvenience, I like how it turns the act of falling forever into something with actual gameplay. I particularly like how each individual section had different types of gameplay, so it didn't feel terribly stale throughout. It certainly helps that the level's only about a minute and a half long. It doesn't overstay its welcome, that's for sure. And I found myself using it as a palate cleanser on more than one occasion. All that said, while I enjoy this level and feel it accomplished what it set out to do, it has some hiccups in its execution. For one, the Count Bomb and Sheep Block sections both feel way less interesting than either of the concrete platform parts. I get that the concept is temporary platforms, since those naturally give as little ground time as possible, but the actual gameplay is pretty much just move a little, wait, repeat. It's not a whole lot going on. The music also doesn't loop, which can rear its ugly head when you're going for 100% in here. Most curiously, I think the level would have been improved by using actual death spikes. As it is now, it's so easy to clear this level, I think it might be harder to die, barring doing something like standing on the spikes. Or, getting crushed by the concrete platforms. Just saying. Than it is to complete the level without taking any damage. I suppose that helps the palate cleanser aspect, but if you're looking for a challenge, this is absolutely the wrong place for it. Otherwise, while this isn't exactly a work of art, I enjoyed it regardless. Maybe it's some MagMammal 1 judge nostalgia talking, but this is a level I've come back to more than once just to play it, and that alone means it did something right. Shinryu. So this is essentially objective vein space, but with actual hazards. That said, this level leaves a lot to be desired. It's kind of a shame, since a stage where you're in a near-constant state of freefall could work if the hazards you faced were more interesting, or threatening, than the ones found here. The only time I ever felt I was in danger during this level was whenever the concrete platforms showed up, given how they were positioned. Even then, however, they weren't exactly all that difficult to maneuver around. The low difficulty turned this into a pretty dull experience as a whole, which wasn't really helped by the severely lacking aesthetics. As it stands, the only aesthetic elements in this level are the obstacle graphics and the music. I think it goes without saying that this really could have used a background. I understand that some backdrop patterns might run the risk of being too distracting in a level like this, but I think it could work if the background was simplistic enough. Like I said, the general idea behind this is fine. There just needs to be a lot more to it in order to work out. Patchy. Space. It's very vain. Took me a while to recognize the joke. Even outside of the reference, it was certainly a unique concept for a level. Just a vertical shaft of maneuvering across platforms and avoiding spikes and being crushed, while grabbing some tokens along the way. Short but actually an oddly thrilling experience. Kind of an odd difficulty curve as it goes from hard to easy. The up-moving concrete man platforms have the tendency to crush the player against other platforms if not careful. The time bombs require some component of timing with dodging the explosions. Meanwhile, with the sheep blocks, you have more than enough time to get yourself positioned to not fall into the spikes. At least the downgoing concrete man platforms fit appropriately as the final challenge. There isn't much in the way of design. All sections are isolated with one certain platform type associated. There could have been some interesting challenges if the platform types had been mixed around. Aesthetics-wise, it's literally a void. I mean, I get it. It's a parody of Vein Space, but even that level had a background at least. Having the Mega Man & Bass boss music as the stage music is pretty funny though, as one could argue that the stage is a boss in itself in this situation. Flashman 85. I don't know what's more surprising, that someone made a spiritual successor to MagMammal 1's lowest ranked level, Operation Vein Space, or that it placed higher than 54 other levels in this contest. Not that I would classify this as a good level, mind you. invisible collision objects, music that abruptly stops instead of looping, an abyss of nothingness for the graphics, a layout that never explicitly communicates that down is always the way to go, a purely incidental challenge factor resulting from symmetrically arranged gimmicks, and a series of blind falls. No, these things make me frown. At the same time, the level refrains from doing anything that ruins whatever fun there is to be had. New gimmicks are introduced at a steady pace, with sufficient time to hastily adapt to them, and each section is generally more difficult than the last. Checkpoints are perfectly spaced. Spikes don't kill you instantly, which minimizes the frustration of being blindsided. The length is thoroughly reasonable. Whether or not this was on purpose, the level manages to tick some of the most important boxes for me in terms of design. Also, there is something marginally satisfying about triggering lots of gimmick platforms at once. Overlooking the beginner trap that kicks off the section, the falling platforms over spikes are legitimately decent. The music, while it lasts, sets an appropriately frantic tone. I am disappointed, though, that there's no reward for riding the first platform back up beyond the top of the starting screen. I honestly wouldn't have thought to try that. For a level whose purpose is to be pointless emptiness, I won't split hairs about the title because Narcissistic Stratosphere amuses me, I suppose this is as good as can be expected. Okay, so the vein wasn't meant to be, like, conceited. Words with more than one meaning. It was meant to be like doing something in vain. Okay. I never understood the meaning of that title. That makes a bit more sense, maybe? But yes, Narcissistic Stratosphere is a kind of amazing title. And a spark. Well, this was easy. If you were expecting a comic, no. Honestly, I can respect the hustle, trying to make a stage out of a meme. It's almost on the verge of working. I think if this had any challenge or nuance whatsoever, it might even be replayable. Instead, it's forgettable, and I think that's worse than being dreadful. Oh, and that's the end of that one. Okay, fair enough. So yeah, I'm afraid the reference went over my head because I did not at all remember vein space. You have to realize, some of these projects were a long time ago, because I think as things worked out, MagMammal 1 was the final project I did on my old computer when I first started the channel, and I want to say MagMammal 2 was the first project on Groose, so yeah. Either way, both were a long time ago, so I'm not always going to remember references to the first two MagMammals. Overall, this was a simple enough little obstacle challenge, a quick stage, and one that kind of lured me into getting slightly one more leveled by the next one. But overall, this stage in and of itself, it was pretty fun, and yeah, the music used, even if it didn't loop properly, it set a nice sort of frantic pace. I do, however, agree that some of the pacing was a little bit weird. Like, the sheep block segment was definitely no threat whatsoever, so for that to have been, I think, third in line, that felt a little strange. And finally we have 120th place, Red Mountain by Viral. This one got a 45.2, with a 3 in difficulty, 13.8 in design, 9.6 in fun, 6.4 in creativity, 7.4 in aesthetics, and 8 in functionality. Mick. So Mega Man decided to take a break from Wily to challenge Eggman. I can see the idea. The majority of the reskins here work reasonably well, and not just in the graphical sense. Springer proved a surprisingly effective obstacle alongside Fire Totem, and Totem Polens actually got to use their jumping function. Similarly, the fire bars were surprisingly entertaining throughout, and the only reskin who was routinely just there was returning Monking. The non-reskinned enemies were a non-presence. Dumbcatch vanishes entirely on the level 2nd route, but the real biggest issue is the hammers. I appreciate that they don't block shots for a change. I don't appreciate their terrible contrast against dark backgrounds. Speaking of visual clarity, the pass-throughs in the level look like regular solids. That got confusing to say the least. Yeah, I kinda get that. The level also splits into 2 paths, which is a bit of a mixed bag. The downwards path is great, with some of the most creative sections, plus a music change for variety's sake. The only real weakness here is the most complicated and interesting setup, Fire Totem plus Springer plus Totem Polen plus Firebar, shows up earlier than ideal, and beyond that the area's just kinda there. The rightmost path has a new element with Jamecy pipes, but there's only one significant challenge with the hammer spring, which is easily bypassed, everything else is easy. For that matter, there's a lot of this level that can be bypassed with weapons. Some of it feels clever, and it's a boon with multiple elements. but the ability to skip most everything can get kinda dull. The other big issue with the Jamassi path, it also doesn't have a boss, which is a massive anticlimax considering the other route uses an Eggman-style Mega Mech Shark. Considering the Eggman Shark actually uses other pieces of the level to twist the fight, he's a surprisingly interesting fight, which really just makes the other route's lack of an end boss more jarring. There's also a Twin Stonehead mid-boss who is a rather rough fight. Considering it's a dual dev kit boss, I surprisingly don't hate the fight, but it can be a rough time trying to dodge everything. I still kind of wonder if my second playthrough, if they overlapped, because it felt like they went down really fast. So that was strange. Shinryu. This is a rather tricky level to pin down. On one hand, it's pretty clear there was effort put into it, given how you're expected to approach some of the platforming segments. Despite that, it doesn't always translate to it being good. The main culprits here are the springs and the swinging hammers. Segments involving these either lean towards being very forgiving, to somewhat frustrating given how much stuff can actively get in your way. Sometimes it's as simple as luring an enemy away to give you a clear path to launch off the spring, while other times you'll have to hit an enemy on springs while contending with other hazards that may or may not sync up well with things, mainly the fire pillars in the underground segment. The one moment that sticks out to me the most was one of the final jumps during the above ground path, involving a large gap, a swinging hammer above, and a fire pillar on the other side. It's certainly doable, but it definitely strikes me as an overly punishing setup, especially when we consider the lack of checkpoints in this level. Enemy placement is also a mixed bag. Sometimes they synergize well with the room layout and other gimmicks, but other times they are placed in a way that poses next to no threat. Totem Pullins and returning Monk Kings are the biggest offenders, often having no middle ground with their challenges. They either play off their surroundings well, or they're incredibly easy to dispatch from a distance. Aside from the platforming and a few other moments, such as the Stonehead fight with the 2 rows of boulders, along with the Mega Mech Shark battle, the only other thing that stood out to me in this stage was the visuals. They're odd, given the use of multiple different looking ground tiles that you can walk and jump through. It's a bit on the messy side, to the point where I found myself enjoying the underground path a bit more thanks to the lack of background details clashing with the terrain. Overall, while I can see some potential with the platforming here, it definitely needs some more polish. Patchy. Red Mountain Zone Act 1. The thing that is definitely standing out right away is the aesthetics. Judging from some of the Eggman robot-like reskins, I'm guessing this stage is supposed to be a Sonic reference of a sort. There's a lot of mixing and matching with tile sets, such that it can be hard to tell where floors are at times. Some tiles can also be inconsistent, like the floor in the lava section sometimes being top solid and sometimes purely solid. The Spike Hammer reskin seems to have the wrong offset, which makes an otherwise default engine asset bounce weirdly as the anchor keeps changing place. Not sure I noticed that. The mini-boss room could have been handled better in terms of letting the player choose their path after said mini-boss is defeated. Oftentimes I fall to the lava section when not meaning to, because that's usually the place the player would stand fighting the hectic double rock boss. Sometimes it's hard to tell where to go, as well. The lava section has a split path where it looks like down would be the way to progress, and left is the token path. It'll also make sense, right? As right or bottom tend to be commonly the way forward, but here it's the opposite. Moreover, in the mountain section, one of the holes on the wall looks like it may be leading to a secret, but it's the actual way to progress. What's more, there's 2 of those holes in 2 different rooms and they lead to the same place. That was confusing. The screen with the M-Tank doesn't look like you can exit from the left. The sign pointing to the right near the M-Tank doesn't help clarify either. There is one jump with the spring and the spike hammer that gave me a lot of trouble. It is way too precise for one thing. You don't get a lot of control off the bounce when you're on the swing, which leaves you vulnerable. Timing the bounce to get past the hammer swinging is also made difficult. Worst part is there are bottomless pits around the tiny spring platform, and if you fall off here, you get sent back pretty far back. Oi. I like the changes done here with the shark ship boss. The springs really help with accelerating the fight since they let you reach the weak points easier. Weak points, yes. Spots and points. I have invented new language. Oi. The weak spot's easier, though the middle section seems to be aiming for the opposite effect, as the spike hammer there is only there to get in the way and be annoying. The other path has no boss, even though there was a checkpoint before the final room. Don't get too hasty to grab the element though, as there's a hidden screen transition nearby that leads into a token. Seriously? That'd have to be the worst way to hide a token, considering the player would have to go through the entire stage again if they happen to miss the spot. Yeah, I am very fortunate that I checked. Flashman85. The secret to a good referential level is capturing the feel of the source material. You've got monkeys, hammers, and lava, but you also need, at the very least, more appropriate music and a sense of speed if you're going to channel Sonic Adventure. It took me entirely too long to realize that the boss of Red Mountain wasn't going to be Dagoth-Ur. And that reference has gone cleanly over my head. Setting aside the theming, the level still falls short in several areas. Graphically, there's no unifying style. The custom sprites clash with each other, and they don't really look like Mega Man or Sonic. It seems like the tiles were selected because they're all mountainy, not because they fit nicely together. Top solid platforms are the main problem. The screens with fewer layers look pretty decent. Even with the arrow signs in the background, the level layout is confusing. Unexpected directional shifts do not work well with solid screen edges and bottomless pits that look like they might be transitions. Rush Coil easily disrupts the intended flow of several screens, which also makes the choice of locked weapons a bit dubious. Inconsistent object collision adds more confusion. It's unnerving to discover that certain background pillars are secretly ladders, for example. I don't think I found anything like that. If I did, it's been long enough that I do not remember, because yes, I may have been playing Mario Kart World for the last couple of days. Biker Bowser is very overwhelmed looking for stuff in free mode. Send help. It's hard to achieve a good challenge progression with a jumbled level flow, but there are standalone moments of gaming goodness. I'm so glad to see Totem Poland's jumping ability put to good use. I like the simple, effective twist on familiar mini-boss fight, which ended up being my favorite part of the level. It's gratifying to be rewarded for poking around beyond the suspiciously sudden ending screen. The best parts of the level are the simplest ones. I think a crossover might have been too ambitious when so many of the basics need polish, but I recognize the effort that went into trying it anyhow. And A-Spark. This is unfortunately a stage where almost everything went wrong. The stage has an overabundance of enemies at just about every point, an over-reliance on death pits, and way too few checkpoints to counteract that. It would take too long to point out everything, but there were some noteworthy issues. There were too many enemies, many of whom had a lot of health, so it took ages getting from screen to screen. There was a lot of waiting, with timing challenges that result in death if you fail them. The mini-boss was abysmal. It was a very difficult fight at the end of a very long level section. It was unavoidable with certain spawn locations. It can also drop you into the pit as it dies, locking you out of the upper route. The music was not Sonic related, which I would have expected with the obvious references, and just felt lazy. The transition to the second zone was awful. You had the original music play for a couple of seconds, dropping down the pit before entering the lava zone and changing. Whenever you died, you got to hear the awkward music change, which happened a lot. The tile set was poor, with many instances where it was difficult to tell what was solid floor and what dropped you into a pit. There were many enemies camouflaged into the background, for instance the hammers in the lava zone. Yeah, they were a little bit trickier for me to see there, admittedly. There was no boss on one route, despite the checkpoint, and the other was a boring boss made simpler than the original in two forms and an obnoxious second form. There were only 2 checkpoints. The level was long and, given all the above, was overly punishing. In order to keep the review concise, looks like we have had to resort to bullet points, which is never a good sign. Overall, most of this stage I just found kind of confusing routing-wise. Like I said, there's that thing where there's 2 paths that lead to the exact same room somehow. It really wasn't clear what was a transition and what was like the hard edge of the stage. Indeed, some of the terrain, it was kind of difficult to parse, like what was solid, what wasn't. There were some issues with enemies blending into the background sometimes because of very similar palettes. So, yeah, a lot here was kind of on the confusing side. And, yeah, it definitely felt like Sonic music should have been used. It was kind of weird that it wasn't. Overall, effort was put into this stage, but yeah, the layout just felt kind of confusing to me, which is always a problem in a stage where you have 2 exits and multiple tokens, because then it becomes just this feeling of, oh gods, I don't want to miss it. What if I missed it? Did I miss it? Do I need to go back? Ah! And that's how I felt during a good part of it. Also, I just have to say, the Mecha Shark is not exactly my favorite boss, just because it's 3 stages, and the second part is always super annoying because of the low clearance, and you have to jump in order to hit the little what's the word I'm looking for? The hatches where the minions are dropped out of. Unless, of course, you use weapons. That, of course, makes things easier. But Bone Buster only, yeah, you don't have a lot of headroom there. So that's always a very annoying part of that boss for me. So I do appreciate the other two parts being made easier to get to the weak points. I do not appreciate that hammer in the middle of the second part. That was not fun. But yeah, with that, that's where we're going to end it for now. Dear gods, over a half hour of judge commentary. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the series so far, and I shall see you again next time. Until then, fare thee well. I'm going back to looking for question mark panels.